All right. Hi, everybody. Last session of KubeCon Seattle. You made it. You're here. Appreciate your dedication. Thank you for coming. Excuse my voice, please. I have been under the weather all week, and this is the best because I slept till 1:30 to make this happen. Just FYI. But anyway, I'm the least important voice is mine here today. I have amazing panelists who are all practitioners in large companies who are going to talk about their experiences with us. So I'll just kick us off really quickly with a brief intro to our topic. And then we'll start with introductions and questions. If you have questions, I highly encourage you to ask them in the last 10 minutes of the session, which will be open to anybody. If people want to scoot over to the front, that's also cool since we have space, but no pressure. This is a decent showing for the last session. I'm really happy, actually. All right, so let's begin. So the topic is the weeds of cloud native. So actually, Matt here and I were discussing this, I think about 6 months ago, just before the CFP is open for KubeCon, about just how prolific the KubeCon ecosystem has been in the last 2 years. Just how many tools have sprung up, because how many problems sprung up, right? So with the coming of Kubernetes, microservices got easier for us to build and deploy. But then like to operationalize at scale, you have to, in some ways, relearn the tooling to make it work as well, if not better, than the past. So just going to the sponsor floor, you see so many different vendors. And every year, I see so many new ones. And I'm like, man, it's like you're constantly learning. And that's great. But that also means that you combine all these various tools, all the new problems we face, with the smaller size of teams, because microservices enable smaller project teams, et cetera, and people choosing their own. And suddenly you have tens, if not 20s, hundreds of tools in each company. So I started thinking about this problem. And we at GitLab, which is where I work, see this often in large-scale companies that at some point there's a tipping point, right? And at which enterprises have to start thinking through an organized way of tooling across the company. So my experience, I see it every day. And so I brought together these ed practitioners to tell us their perspectives, and so we can all learn and make the best tooling choices for all of our companies. So that's the topic. Now let's get started. As I mentioned, I work at GitLab. I'm the director of Cloud Native Alliances there. I spend a lot of my time working on just the cloud native ecosystem. I support a lot of projects. I'm a contributor to the Open Tracing project. I'm on Twitter on Priyanka. You can find me there. Feel free to tweet any questions, any follow-ups to this panel. I'm also going to keep this panel going with live streams over time. And so if you want to participate, you can reach out. So that's me. I would love you guys to start introducing yourself.
Sure, Bren.
Is it working?
I'm Brendan A. I'm Director of Platform Architecture at T-Mobile. Been there for about 7 or 8 years now, focusing primarily on Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes.
Awesome.
Melissa Chapman, Director of IT for CVS. I've been there about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I was with Brendan at T-Mobile.
Hi, I'm Jasmine James from Delta Airlines. I'm a senior systems engineer of the DevOps COE at Delta. Been there for about 2 years.
Hey, I'm Matt Klein. I'm a software engineer at Lyft. I've been there for coming up on 4 years. I work mostly on infrastructure, and I started the Envoy proxy project.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's begin, panelists. Let's make sure that we're on, two per mic. So just to make sure all our definitions and company stages are aligned and we know where people are at, I'd love to hear from each of you your definition of cloud native and where your company is in their journey towards that.
Sure, I would say cloud native is the ability to adapt a service or a piece of software in a very agile way across any provider that you're running on, whether it's on-premise private cloud or any of the major cloud providers, with minimal changes, if any, to the application itself.
Got it. Awesome.
Yeah, so just to add to that, I'd also think that Cloud Native gets us back to the developer team as the central kind of front. So ops has always been this, red-headed stepchild, if you will. We're always bad, we always hold people up, and by switching to this, it's really forced us to look at how do we embrace our developer community and help them actually get there and take our advice to them more often. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, so to me, Cloud Native, I think, is just really being focused and concise with your services and making them do one thing and do it well.
To me, Cloud Native is how we abstract infrastructure from application development. So that's very difficult. We don't always do it as well as we could, and we're always trying to make it better. But I think that's the goal.
Would you all agree? The abstraction? Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So in each of your respective companies, I would love to know how tooling is playing a role in going cloud native. Where are you at? Is it too many, too few? Would love to hear that. Trick question. Just kidding.
It's always too many.
Right? I was like wondering if anyone
what
would like.
categories to a tool is. People want to try every one of them, want to buy every one of them, and no one can really settle on what is the best of anything in most cases. So I would say, tooling plays a huge part of it because it really affects everything that you're doing.
Right.
At the same time, tooling is a means to an end. You don't see Wall Street Journal articles about the great tool stack some companies put out there. It's not relevant to anyone but the company itself. It doesn't generate value in and of itself. It really is a way for them to deliver, operate, observe the applications that actually do deliver business value. So tools are extremely important, but it's also important to not get too hung up on which one it is or what you're going to do with it.
Right.
I also agree. I mean, there's a tool under the sun for everything, any problem that you can imagine. One of the challenges that I think that we have is if you have a bad piece of code or a bad application and you think a tool is going to fix it, you are so wrong because that bad application is just going to be bad in a new tool. On the flip side...
So you mean just don't go and buy something new, like right away? That is what you're saying?
No, you just download it. It's fine. I would also say that, you also need to encourage creativity. So if you're stuck on a tool and it is not working, don't wait a year before you abandon it. Like, just go. Control your destiny, for sure.
That's a really good point.
So we're fairly new in our cloud native journey. So we're still discovering and learning new things. So I would just say we have to try. If you don't try, like, what are you doing? You have to make sure you're trying new things, listen to the people that are actually using the tools, and that's what we're trying to do, making sure that those mature teams that are out there in our IT enterprise, we're listening to them. What are they doing today? So that way we can have it across the enterprise, use it at the enterprise level versus just in little pockets. So.
Yeah, those are all great answers. I think the thing that I would add just about tooling and people is I think when you come to this conference, people like to think that we can solve every problem by code or a tool or something else, and I don't think that's true. I think there's still a lot of human issues around how people use tools and support tools and learn about tools and all those kinds of things, and I wish people would talk about that more. So I guess that would be my one comment, is that tools are great and abstractions are great, but if no one knows how to use them or find them or discover them or whatever, they don't really have any value. So that would be my comment about tools.
So Matt, you specifically have a very unique journey, right? So I know you've seen and been part of Lyft figuring out its infrastructure and then abstracting it as much as possible. And you've built a lot of that, and Envoy has now taken its own life, and it's also amazing. I mean, how many people here went to EnvoyCon or one of the Envoy sessions? Look. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's awesome, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey so we can all compare notes. Oops.
Sure. I don't want to take up the entire session, so I'll try.
I know it is a big TLDR.
Very, very brief, but I joined Lyft when I think there was probably 70 or 80 developers, and we had a 10-person quote DevOps team. We could have a whole discussion about what DevOps means. So we had a small infrastructure team doing lots of different things, and I think we were facing the problems that many other companies face, where moving to microservices, having trouble understanding where problems are, or around observability or networking, or how do people uniformly deploy code or package it? I mean, all the common things. And I think that, like every other company, we've tried to take an iterative approach, and that's really what I recommend to everyone on their journey is to really think about what problems are being faced and try to do them incrementally. Like, there's no big bang solution. Kubernetes is not going to save you, or like some tool is not going to save you. It's like, to me, it's about incremental problem solving. So I mean, I'll stop there because I could talk forever about this, but I think that Lyft has gone through a very incremental journey of like one database to many and solving particular problems, or implementing Envoy to solve particular problems, or other tools. And I think that's all that we can do.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And so for everyone here, I think it's like solve incrementally, don't boil the ocean, and there's too many tools out there. Like, that's pretty, we're all in consensus. So how are you handling that for your companies? Like, right now there's 31 projects in CNCF. Do you use all of them? How do you decide what to do?
So for us, it's honestly, we don't boil the ocean, so it was one problem at a time, right? I mean, all of you know what CVS receipts look like, so to try to tackle that fantastic challenge was a perfect solution, right? So who uses it, who doesn't, and how do we digitize them? So that was one place. We just start there, right? And then once it catches on, move to the next. And you learn as you go along. We started with some tools that we thought were going to help us and didn't. And so we shifted very quickly, but it ended up being fantastic.
So just so I understand, what you're saying is that you focused on one of the applications, basically, right? Which was digitizing your receipts, and made that perfect, and then...
Yeah.
What is that perfect?
So for us right now, what that perfect was actually putting it on your smartphone. But on the behind that, they also add a bunch of coupons and all. The thing that makes that receipt. I think I got sent a curtain replacement or a Halloween costume. So on Thursdays, actually, when they would release new coupons, we would crash servers. So we had this massive farm of servers just to handle one day and a handful of hours of traffic.
One receipt?
Yeah, pretty much. So what going to the container solutions had allowed us to do was not have to use that infrastructure solely just for them, so we could spread out the capacity and then get them their capacity for one day. So that's the problem we ended up going after, but what we discovered on the flip side is how easy it was to digitize that very long receipt.
Oh, that's so interesting. See, this is why I like having end users here. They tell you these real world stories, and it's so great. Thank you for sharing. Do you want to share something similar? Or different?
I always give her a hard time about CVS receipts. I asked if they have to scale up apps just to print them out, and clearly they actually do have to scale up.
These two are a piece in a pod, so I'm going to ask them where they disagree as well, because we built a lot together.
Yeah, so. Too much history here. I mean, for us, I look at every choice of tool as being temporary. There's no right solution to a problem. There's continually evolving solutions to problems. And like Melissa said, if you have a problem that's a solution that's not meeting your needs completely, don't be afraid to cut bait and run to something else. Ideally, build in such a way that you're not tied to individual tools. Be more flexible with your interfaces. So if you want to emit metrics somewhere, don't go directly to Influx or OpenTSDB. Go through Telegraph maybe, so you can tee things off, send it out to a bunch of different providers at the same time, and evaluate all these places at once. So really, don't be married to your tools. Be very flexible in your processes, and understand what matters to you and what doesn't, and be willing to plug things in and out. Especially as there's new changes in the industry. Like you said, there's dozens of tools for any single use case. So understanding what you can try after a year or two. Maybe Prometheus 1.0 didn't work that well, but Prometheus 2.0, a lot of solutions that you weren't able to achieve before in earlier iterations. So continually trying these things out. I think most importantly, don't try to reinvent patterns yourself. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Look at what other major companies are doing and try to adapt their solutions, because there's companies out there that probably don't need to build their own TSDB. They probably can use something else that's already out there.
Absolutely.
So for us, since we're just starting our journey, I have like a simple method for determining, like if a tool is going to be applicable to our environment. It goes AEIOU. So, yeah. So the A is it applicable to our environment, right? Does it fit within our transformation journey? Is it going to help us get where we want to go? Then E is for enterprise readiness, right? Can it be used at the enterprise level? Is it integrated? Can we integrate it well with other pieces of the puzzle that we have? And then O, overhead, right? Is it going to cause a lot of overhead for our developers or whoever's going to own the tool in the end? And then U is it useful? And that's like really the most important thing, right? We don't want to just buy or get a tool or use a tool just to have it. We want to make sure it can actually be used in the right way. So that's really what I go off of.
That is really, I
I'm
love
stealing
it.
that.
I love it.
That's pretty awesome.
It's so awesome. So the very interesting thing here, right? U is the most useful, but it's the one of so many. There's A, E, I, O that also need to be checked off. And I think people forget that, especially. So now that you've attended this panel, you know AEIOU, and you cannot forget this.
I think the enterprise readiness is huge as well. You see a lot of tools that seem like they solve a lot of problems, and you dive into it, you realize, I can't even make this thing highly available. How am I supposed to depend on it to operate my most critical infrastructure 24/7, 365, and actually get alerts when I need them? So that enterprise readiness for me is one of the first ones I look at. If I can't Google the name of the tool and highly available, and there's no answers out there, it's probably off the list right away.
Yeah. Speaking of enterprise readiness, let's talk about horror stories. So if any of you is open to sharing, I'd love to hear about a decision that was made in tooling. It can be any decision that ended up horribly wrong, but you learned from it, and there's a lesson for all of us here. Sorry, my line of sight is directly you. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Geez, yeah. So I won't go into specifics about it, but we've so when I joined CVS, they were just entering their digital journey, and so I was brought in to do platform as a service, and we had teams that were itching to jump on board. So we got our platforms up, and things were great. We actually had a team that we said, look, we're going to let you lift and shift. They had a bunch of contractors. They said, oh, I can do all this amazing stuff. They get on the platform, and the next thing I know, they're asking for 150, 200 gigs worth of space on there to run their application in a microservice. Oh. And so we had to go back and sort of, reschool them a little bit on how you develop and what it looks like. What does a microservice look like? What's the definition of it? How does it qualify? Yeah, and so it was really frustrating, but at the same time, they're an extension of our team, so we had to help them. They had also been doing very traditional development, so it was, I guess my advice would be to make sure that the first apps that you onboard can quickly adapt to changes, can quickly adapt to faults and failures, and be willing to accept your feedback to them to help them change. I think that they thought these crazy people were coming in and telling them they were horrible at their job, and that wasn't it at all, but that's certainly probably how it came across, because it was an important call that they moved in there and broke it, but at least we were able to fix it pretty quickly. So. Right.
Have the mic. Okay, I guess I have to talk. So I wasn't going to share, but I'll share. So my role on the team is primarily owning the development tools. So the tools that our developers use every day, like GitLab, Nexus, Jenkins, and whatever else we decide to bring on board. So previous to all these modern tools that I just mentioned, we had a homegrown tool, because they say if there's nothing out there that fits your need, what do? You build it yourself, right? So the thing about that, it's not really a horror story, but it really makes it difficult to move forward and do the new things. You have Kleenex, right, in case I shed a tear? Okay. But yeah, so it just made it difficult for my team to kind of bring about that DevOps mindset. When you have this one monolith tool that does everything, you can't move very quickly because no one out there really knows how to use it. So you can't really deploy fast. You can't really build fast. It was just really, really sad. But we have moved on to more modern tools like GitLab and Nexus and things like that have really made our developers' lives easier. And it's not so hard to bring people on, new developers. How hard is it to find a developer that knows a homegrown tool, right? So, yeah. So it's kind of a sad story, but we're better now.
That's awesome. You guys? Ooh, there's like side banter here. Melissa's telling Brendan what he should tell us. Never mind. Matt, do you want to share something?
I must have blocked it. It must have been some bad memories. I think I blocked it out. Yeah, it scarred me for life.
I don't have any particular horror story, at least not one that I'm willing to share being recorded. But yeah, you know, I think my advice is more how to avoid horror stories, which is to, you know, like always have a plan to do an evaluation of a technology, which was said before. So, you know, does it tick various boxes about like high availability and a bunch of other stuff? Does it have good documentation? Are there people supporting it? And then, you know, always figure out a way to do a staged rollout and always be able to roll back. And that sounds really obvious, but, you know, you'd be surprised at how often that doesn't happen. So I think, you know, as long as you can test out some things relatively quickly and you know, get one's feet wet and then be able to roll back and abort. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in the AEIO, oh, you remembered?
Yeah, I remembered.
Okay,
So,
thank you, Melissa.
This is not necessarily a failure of a tool, but almost a overwhelming success of a tool. There's a quote I've kept my signature for about 6 years or so. It's the tendency of a hammer to treat every problem like it's a nail. And so sometimes you have tools that just because it can do something doesn't mean it should. One of the guys in the audience here is a guy who built this with me, but VMware vCloud Director was a fairly simple solution for delivering IaaS to an enterprise. And at the time, it took people about 30 days to get a VM at T-Mobile. With VMware vCloud Director, which we branded as T-Cloud, how clever of us, it would take them 3 or 4 minutes. So they could get these VMs very quickly. We made sure they understood there's no backups, there's no patching. These are strictly for low governance dev tests, like don't do anything resembling production on here. So we turned this on and saw what happened with it. And within a few months or so, we had VPs calling us because their production servers were down. That were all running on this T-Cloud system. We had a whole development team over in India that was saying, our development boxes aren't fast enough. Can you please increase the resources? Because they were running these boxes like desktops inside this T-Cloud environment. So if you put something out there, people will find ways to use it that you never thought possible. And you should always kind of expect that. So
that's so true.
As good as possible, set up guardrails where you can,
right.
And make sure that you have a way to enforce those guardrails.
So guardrails. That's the other thing I want to talk about. We had a prep call, and Melissa was like, "I hate the word governance," and that's fair. It's governance, guardrails, like similar concepts. So actually, I'd like to hear from whoever in the panel wants to go first. Governance versus guardrails. What do you pick? And it could just be a philosophical choice, and you might end up actually be doing the same thing as the next company. But I want to hear, which do you lean towards, and then how your company thinks about that. So do you want to go, Jasmine?
Sure. So we have a lot of mission critical applications that, we have to really kind of, really govern and make sure that everyone is kind of doing the same thing in the same way, just to make it easier for, us to fix issues if they happen. On the development tool side, we're like, when it comes to developer tools and how they develop, we more so take a standpoint of guardrails. We give developers options because we want to preserve that creativity, like you said, Melissa. We want to make sure that they can do what they need to do, and we don't want to be the constraint, right? We don't want to really stifle their creativity. So I'm going to say both, governance and guardrails where needed. That's how we roll.
To be clear, we do governance.
Right, Etna and CVS.
Let me state that. So it is the governance for me in large companies that I've worked for. Governance has always turned into silos and these roadblocks and this massive thing that you just have to overcome. Right. So if you tell, look, here's what you can stay in. If you're in these, 5 blocks or whatever, good, go. If a person has to touch a button along the way, automate it and just stop making it, be governance. So with that, I'll just say that I don't like putting, these hardcore rules around things, but there are in some cases that we do actually have to do that because of HIPAA. So your data is safe.
I think at Lyft, we also do the combination of guardrails and governance. I personally think that just from a homogeneous standpoint, it is good to have some level of uniformity on your technology stack, like whether that be some set of databases, doesn't mean it has to be one, but some set of databases or caches or networking or compute or functions. And I think the reason for that is just mainly around operations, cognitive load, like trying to make it so that you can have common documentation and stuff like that. So at Lyft, I think we've actually done a pretty decent job of trying to pick a set of sanctioned or governed technologies that people can choose from. I think we're flexible. I think we try to be open to, does someone want to do something new, and we haven't allowed it yet, should we? And I think we've adapted pretty quickly to doing that. But so I also tend to take the middle ground approach of it's good to limit the bounding box boundaries, but we should be open to expanding them. Well, and also actually deprecating. That's also part of it too. So how one deprecates technology is very hard.
I think that's a very good point. I have kids. One thing you learn when you're a parent is if you want your kids to do something, give them 2 options, and you are happy with both those options. So I think governance is largely the same thing. If I want to tell people to do something, I'll give them a set of choices they can make, and any of those choices are things that I'm okay with them doing. But yeah, I generally feel that governance should not be an asking for permission. It should be laying out choices, laying out capabilities, and they're able to choose from these selectively, and they really can't do something that's going to be against the standards you want them to follow.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in the AEIOU, there was the integrated was one of the things, right? And so at GitLab, being a single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle, all the people that use us really believe in that whole, the single hub type, single application type experience. And I'm curious to hear what you folks' thoughts are. Do you try to go towards something that's more kind of a hub-like model, where it's like maybe one main tool and a couple of things that plug into it? How are you looking at that integration piece? Do you want to start?
Sure. I would say that if a tool can do 2 things and it's the best at both those things, I'll use it for both those options. I don't want to use features of a tool just because they're there because I already have the tool, if it's not as good as something else. I don't want to name vendors, but there's some logging tools now that started integrating metrics, and some metrics tools that started integrating logging. And I feel like that's a good way to be bad at both those things. So I'd rather pick a set of distinct tools that are able to do things the best they can and have integration points where they can, expose the features of one or the other, but not actually try to combine them all into the same pane of glass, because that pane of glass is always going to be too crowded or not good enough or frustrating in some way. So you'll feel limited there, and once you build all your standards around this, you're gonna have a hard time convincing people we need to buy a different tool because this one we already pay for is not quite good enough. I need something slightly better in a different way.
Just say ditto.
Sure.
Yeah, we are the same way. So I'm a firm believer that sometimes one tool does a great job at one thing, and trying to boil the ocean actually starts to break that tool down a little bit. But at the same time, I don't want 30 tools that do the exact same thing because one person likes it one simple way or whatever. So it's just
how do you make that call? Like that is the key question, right?
Yeah. So well, for us, we've got 3 repositories. One, because we're a heavy mainframe shop, and so they were just integrated a long time ago. It works. It's automated. I'm not going to mess with it. It just, it isn't worth a hassle right now when we've got so many other places that we can go solve. We had another team using a completely different tool, and then when I came in, we brought in your tools. And so, you know, trying to figure out what's the best case scenario for them, I don't know, but I do know that when we build out our container strategy, that this is the route that we went because it was easy to build some templates and things like that. And the more people that have tried it have been on board. So at some point, I hope we get to deprecate one of those 3 tools. So.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is that I do definitely agree that you know, as tools get merged, there can be this phenomenon where, you know, they get worse at 2 different things. I do think, and I've talked about this a lot in other talks and stuff, that I do think that in certain areas, particularly around operations, there is an opportunity to have at least a more integrated viewpoint of what's going on within systems. You know, and that might not be like replicating the logging or the tracing or you know, those types of things. But I do think that right now we see a phenomenon, particularly in operations, where people, you know, you'll see them have 7 or 8 or 10 different browser tabs open, trying to solve particular problems. And they're like trying to click back and forth between different things. And so I think there's a middle ground that we actually have not reached yet of trying to figure out how to at least integrate and cross-link some of these different data sources into ways that people can use them more efficiently so that they don't get into that tab overload scenario where it starts with PagerDuty and then there's like 40 tabs open. And we're not there yet. I do not think there's any good solution today, but I think there's opportunity for that.
I 100% agree. Like, I've spent a lot of time in observability, as some folks know, and a lot of it is that, you know, you get that alert and then you jump through, then you go to the Grafana dashboard, then you click to see, like, oh, what's the trace look like? Oh, wait, actually somebody else is looking all over the logs. It's a little bit of a mess, and the workflow can be a lot better. And I think there's huge opportunity there. But, okay, with that, I've hogged all the time, I know, but does the audience want to ask any questions from the panelists? Yes. Red shirt person. Sorry, is that okay to say? Sorry. Yes. Awesome, thank you. Oh, thank you. We can pass the mic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Would you repeat the question?
Sorry. The question is, why did we build Envoy as opposed to use an existing tool? Linkerd did not exist when we started, so that's one. But in general, at the time, you know, I think we did evaluate, you know, the different available options that were on the market, if you will, whether that be open source or paid products. And generally, when I look at new technologies, I go through, you know, like a procurement process, whether it's open source or not, and you know, look through different check marks and stuff like that. And I think that, you know, we did a bunch of analysis to decide whether it was worth it, whether we should build, whether we should do different things, and the analysis turned out that we should make the tool.
Yes, there's a mic actually that is gonna come to you.
Hi.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks for the panel. You started with the definition of cloud native when you talked about DevOps tooling. I wanted to ask the panel, especially you folks coming from the enterprise, and I'm seeing, you know, kind of born in the cloud company left. We often forget about the people transformation. You talked about the developers, right? When we talk about cloud native, drink the Kool-Aid, but most enterprises, like the 3 of you there, Delta, CVS, right? You have a hybrid environment. You have technical debt, you have legacy debt, then you need to move forward with your transformation. What are you doing to educate your developers? Because not many understand what cloud native is.
Yeah, so at Delta, we have an immersive cultural learning experience that pretty much all of our teams who are moving to microservices go through. It deals with Agile, DevOps, QA, QE, security, all these different things that you have to take into account when moving and transforming yourself. So we have these teams go through this 8-week cycle, and then they learn these new capabilities that will enable them to deliver within the new world. So that's what we're doing. And besides that, and that's not a really scalable thing, right? We have these teams that they go through this, but you have like 4,000, 5,000 other people. So just having learning opportunities out there and making sure that we're well documented and evangelizing essentially.
Yeah, so we do that as well. We have a training site that we've published. They can go take self-service training, things like that. We do 101 sessions pretty regularly, so it's a 2-day session that will travel on site. The advantage that we have had in the last year because of our sort of all-in and digital is we've got to hire new people. So we've brought in people with experience that can teach other developers how you do pair programming, what does a product team look like, and so we use that as sort of our, this is what we're striving to do, but recognize that we're always at some point going to have this old way of running business until it's just, until we've gotten rid of that technical debt, which isn't going to be anytime soon. So when I started a year and a half ago, we kind of gave them a roadmap and said, look, you control the destiny of your career. This is where the future is going, not just here at CVS, but across the tech industry. And so we gave them sort of a path there. We gave them a playground, and then just the opportunity to come and play around. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of my answers will be similar to Melissa's, since we went through the same thing at T-Mobile the first time around. We partnered with a vendor to initially deliver some app transformation workshops where we took a few applications and took these developers and said, we're going to sit with you for 8 weeks and we're going to show you how to transition this app from a much more legacy monolith into some cloud native microservices. So I think using the patterns that we learned there, they were the team that we pointed most other development teams to if they had questions that they wanted to see how things were done, because hopefully those teams had learned in sort of a train the trainer sort of model. And that's worked somewhat well. We also do some 101 courses where we teach people. We've done doing some more in-depth 4 or 5 day cloud native development classes now, and then access to things like Pluralsight, where we're able to give people online training available to them to allow them to kind of consume all this stuff themselves. We have seen that some developers just are not willing or not able to make this jump, and they want to keep on doing things the way they've always been doing them, and you may not be able to stop that. You can tell them this is not the way our company, or as Melissa said, the entire industry is going. If they're late enough in their career, they might not be interested in upskilling. They might just want to ride it out as long as they can, going from company to company until they don't have a valuable skill set anymore, if that happens even the next 10 or 15 years. So you will still face some of that with people that just are not interested in adapting the way that you want them to, and you have to be willing to accept that also, and hopefully still find a role for them if you're interested in keeping those people around.
Hey Priyanka, I just want to make one comment. I work with Verizon as well, and they do something they call a dojo, where they get to go in for 6 weeks, kind of in a similar fashion.
And that's John, by the way. He also works at GitLab. He's awesome at helping us with the mic as well.
Yeah, and we went through a dojo at T-Mobile. I think Melissa's done the same thing. So it's a similar approach that some companies are adopting, where it really is a very in-depth, hands-on. You're paired with people who know what they're doing, and the goal is to really train these people up in the way of doing this, and they should be listening to everything that they hear as gospel. If that happens, that's great. If it doesn't happen, they might still make mistakes as they go on, but learn from the people that you are paying to teach you.
There was a question over there.
Yeah, so can you guys kind of go into a little bit more detail? I myself come from a company that's running a bunch of legacy VM stuff.
Can you repeat?
Sorry. So I come from a company that's running a lot of legacy VM stuff in the cloud, and I was wondering if you guys can kind of go over a quick story of adopting Kubernetes, adopting Kubernetes. Did it come from the bottom up from the developers, or was it like a dictate kind of come down from the upper? And then what was the aha moment that you had something that you could really grow?
So we're still fairly new into our Kubernetes journey. However, we did adapt Pivotal Cloud Foundry about 2.5 years ago or so, and started the transition from legacy monoliths into cloud native microservices. And that came both from bottom up and from top down. We had developers that were frustrated with how long it took them to get resources, and we had leadership that was frustrated with how long it took them to deliver new lines of code. It was 7 months and 72 steps to get new code to production, which is just insane when you think about it. You cannot possibly adapt to business needs when it takes you that long. So really, it came from both sides. You had people who wanted to change, and you had leadership that's willing to support them. And with that, they were really able to make that transition effectively, because as we go out building these platforms, they definitely broke a lot of standards that we had at T-Mobile. So when teams said, no, you can't do that, we could say, well, my VP and your VP both want that to happen, so it's going to happen at some point. Let's try to get a solution that we're both happy with instead of just me. And that usually got people in line because they'd understand this has high-level sponsorship up to the CIO level, and it's the people on the ground making it happen, but without that sponsorship, it's more or less a science experiment that you hope doesn't fail catastrophically, because if it does, then you're not going to have much support there. So starting at both sides is great. You need people on the ground that can do the work, but you need people up top that will support you even if things don't go perfectly.
Yeah. Yep, agreed. So actually, when I came to CVS, our CTO, he brought in the office of the CIO, our CIO built an OCIO, and he left 6 months into our journey. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there goes our executive sponsorship. What are we gonna do? And so for me, it was finding that development team to make the product work. We also started with Cloud Foundry and just journeying into Kubernetes now. So we are moving a bunch of applications up to Kubernetes. And it's definitely been an easier transition because we'd already taught them how to use, how to develop in Spring and how to develop microservices. So giving them back some of the features that Cloud Foundry didn't actually offer them actually has been a little refreshing for them. But now they're like, oh, wait a minute, I have to manage more here. So you kind of have to weigh your trade-offs a little bit. But technical debt is really expensive and it's really hard to get out of. So if you're not all in for your journey, I would say either get all in or just get out and stay put.
Do you want to take a stab? Okay. Yeah, this will be the last question, and after that people can talk off stage, if that's all right.
From Lyft perspective, we're still actually mostly in virtual machines. So most of our compute is still virtual machines. So we have a team working on Kubernetes, and probably in Q1 or Q2 it'll see larger rollout. The reasoning for going to Kubernetes is not really agility. I mean, we had a bespoke stack that we could deploy to very quickly using modern tooling. It was really because of our bespoke stack. And this was said before. I mean, we had our own deploy tooling, our own development tooling, all this other stuff. And as the industry moves forward with tooling built on top of Kubernetes, whether that be something like Spinnaker or other tools that are Kubernetes aware, we can obviously benefit from a larger community to give us things for free. So I think the goal for Kubernetes, maybe in the future, a little bit for bin packing, but in general, I think it's mostly driven by tooling efficiency and trying to get back on the public guardrails versus our own random stuff.
Awesome. I wanted people to know that. I knew you were. I wanted people to hear that. It's a cool story.
Yeah, so my answer is pretty short. We're still in VMs as well, so we're just starting our journey, as I've said. But I think that what prompted our journey is just the need to be able to scale fast with the travel industry having large loads at times. If there's storms or things like that happening, you have to really be able to scale up and down. And with a monolith, it's very difficult to do that. So that's really why we went the route of cloud native, and it's going to make our lives easier and our customers happier. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for taking the time to speak with us. I learned a lot. I hope the audience did too. We appreciate your time. And all of you, please, if you're interested in continuing this discussion, tweet at me, and we'll continue with over live streams and conversation like that. And we'll be here for a few minutes if you have questions. Thanks so much.